Hello and welcome to Rediscovering a Civil War Veteran and His Injuries. This is for the Society of Genealogists. They're all about that place. And my name is Pamela Israel. I would like to tell you a little bit about myself before we get going. You'll see genealogy in German here. That's kind of how I identify myself right now. On the left, you'll see this lovely couple. Those are my parents, dressed in very German clothing. My mother is, all four of her grandparents immigrated from German-speaking areas around 1900. And my father does have one line that's German, but although he's mostly English. Most of his ancestors came, many even as in the 1600s. I consider myself a fourth generation genealogist, mostly because of my father, who got my mother interested. His mother was very into her family history, as well as a great aunt. So it's in my blood, if you will. But we are here to talk about Joseph Billman of Erie, Pennsylvania. And this is on my husband's side of the family. Most of his ancestors immigrated from German areas to Pennsylvania and then ended up in the Erie area. So here you see Lake Erie. The city of Erie is in Erie County on Lake Erie, and it's in the northwest corner of Pennsylvania, and the Pennsylvania is on the East Coast. Now, on the Great Lakes. We're also going to touch on Virginia just a little bit as well. So the family knew almost nothing about the Billmans other than that there was some German heritage and where the tombstones or gravestones are. So we have Maria Billman, who is next to her husband Joseph, dying in 1882, and then we have Joseph's years. He died in 1911. So we did some basic German census research. 1880 census for Erie County, and we see that Joseph Billman was 43. He was a painter born in Baden. Makes sense. We have Mary, born in Hesse-Kassel, so a different German-speaking area, and then 4 children, all born in the United States. That makes sense with the other information we had. We had a photo, which said Billman's on the back around 1900. And so, given that Mary had died in 1882, this makes sense. It's probably Joseph in the middle, flanked by his sons with his 4 daughters behind him. But I went to the newspapers for some more insight about Joseph, and I found some interesting information that kind of started me on the path. That's why I'm giving this talk today. And it says, Joseph Billman remembers Lincoln well. This is the article on the left. Came from Germany when 2 years old. So we have a lot of consistent information, except we didn't know anything about this military service. It said, the article, when Lincoln was assassinated, he, meaning Joseph, was serving as a member of the 82nd Regiment, Pennsylvania, the Volunteers, 3rd Brigade, 1st Division. What? He served in the Civil War? Well, that's kind of interesting. But it appears to have been a pretty important part of his identity in Erie. Because if you look at the article on the right, which is right after his funeral, it's talking about his service. They're calling him comrade. So this is how veterans of the Civil War, at least Union veterans, were often discussed and mentioned. And he was a member of the post-67 GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic. So he was very involved with other veterans after his service. And it also mentions things about his family, of course, as a normal obituary. I did want to mention that it's important to, if you're looking at an immigrant family or a family from a very strong ethnic group in the United States, especially at this era, to see if there's any local language articles about them. This is one about Joseph Billman. You can probably tell it's in German. And very often there will be more information or different information in the German versus the English. In this particular case, there's actually more in the English than in the German. But even in the German, he's talking about his war experience. So it can be quite fruitful to make sure you go into that level of research. But now let's get back to his service. So In Erie, I found the Strong Vincent Post number 67 for the Grand Army of the Republic. And what they've done is they've gone to the different veterans, and they had the veterans capture where they served and what they did. It even shows, when he enlisted. It's curious. He happened to be in a volunteer regiment, but he was drafted, which is kind of an interesting tidbit there, as many people were. But it names where he served, including Mine Run and Cold Harbor, which would be important for him. But what I needed to do once I discovered that he was a Civil War veteran was to see if he had a pension record, and indeed he did. It's a nice fat file at the National Archives, had to go in person, but lots of handwritten statements. One of them was from the examining surgeon's certificate, and it said, "We find ephemeral hernia of left side, 2 inches in diameter each way. Cannot hear a watch tick when pressed against left ear. The voice must be raised to a loud tone for him to hear when spoken to." And what precipitated this? Well, after Joseph applied for a pension, the War Department looked for his records, and it said there was no evidence of alleged disabilities. Accompanying warning reports prior to September 1864 or regimental hospital records are not on file. So they requested a full military history. And that's fun, because you get all kinds of statements from people who knew him before and after the war. This is one from Robert Dill, who employed Joseph as a painter, so consistent profession, for the past 10 years. And he said Joseph was suffering from deafness, subject to attacks of severe pains in the bowels, at times so severe as to disqualify him from work for days. So this was really interfering with his life in many ways. Okay, but what about before the war? Robert Dill was after the war. Well, Andrew Boyd knew him before. He worked with Joseph before the war, and he said he was a sound and able-bodied man. But now he was largely disabled from a rupture and deafness, especially in the left ear, which seriously interfered with his work. However, the government did want to make sure that people were of sound reputation, and what was their standing in the community. And Andrew Boyd, unfortunately, was only a fair reputation and standing. So it went to other people as well. Here's one from Martin Crater, who knew him from the past 45 years. He'd known him for 30 years. He was a neighbor. He was also a landowner. And they met weekly before the War of the Rebellion, which is what many Northerners called the Civil War. He said that Joseph was of good sound hearing, free of any disability before the war, and that he met Billman the evening when he came back from the war. And he was much disabled in his hearing and did complain that he did contract this deafness while in said military service. Now it's almost impossible to converse with him, except upon very violent effort, almost painful at times. And then here's one more that I thought was kind of interesting. So this was actually an attorney statement for Joseph, who's the client. And he said that this Christine Kippert knew the client before the war because the client married her sister. Must be Maria Hess, Anna Maria Hess. And so I get some great genealogical data. Before the war, he was not deaf, but now, yes. And she was now living with her sister. So you get this other genealogical information. And saw almost the same day, Joseph, the day he returned. He was so deaf that he had to holler at him. She had to holler at him to make him hear. And he has so continued ever since. Does not know anything about the hernia. But she says the client would not, out of delicacy, say anything about that to her. However, her reputation for truth is good. So you get some very interesting tidbits this way, right? You also often will get these bonus records in the pension records. So I've seen this in other Civil War pensions. They need to find out a little bit more about the family. And Joseph is talking about his family. So he says that his wife was Mary Hess. They married in, her maiden name, married in May of 1859. The only record is in St. Mary's Catholic Church. He's only been married once. His wife died in October of '82, so very consistent there. And then it lists all his living children, including the 2 sons and 2 daughters and their dates. You'll also see this interesting spelling for born, B-O-R-E-N, which is the German influence. Even though he was raised in the United States, it's clear he still spoke German. And he did get the pension. We know that for sure because there was a drop card. So after he died in 1911, there's a note saying, or card saying, the government should stop paying his pension, and that he was paid $27 a month. So with that, I want to thank you very much for listening to my talk about Joseph Billman and our surprise discovery that he was a Civil War veteran, and equally surprising discovery that he was really had some injuries that very much affected his ability to do things, to work and raise his family. But he was able to successfully raise a family. He had children both before and after his service. So we know that he was able to raise his family, but that he had some major injuries. And with that, thank you. I welcome any questions. My contact information is here, and I hope you enjoy the rest of All About That Place. Thank you.